pay attention, because the atmosphere surrounding this moment is far more significant than it first appears. As daylight reaches its final breath, and the longest day of the year slowly gives way to darkness, an invisible mechanism is clicking into position above you with astonishing precision. This is not one of those ordinary nights that drift by unnoticed. This is not a projection of wishful thinking, nor is it a story your mind has invented to explain an uneasy feeling you cannot shake. Something measurable, something exact, something written into the architecture of the sky itself is unfolding right now. And if you have felt restless, emotionally unsettled, or strangely alert over the past several days, there is a reason. In fact, there is a very specific reason. You may not have identified it yet, but somewhere deep inside, you already sense that a turning point has arrived. A decision stands before you, not a small decision, not a passing preference, a real choice. A choice involving connection, intimacy, commitment, and the people who occupy space in your emotional world. A choice about who truly nourishes your life and who has been quietly drawing energy from it without your full awareness. Perhaps lately you have felt the weight of words that remain unspoken. Perhaps a conversation keeps replaying itself in your thoughts. Perhaps there is tension in a relationship that no distraction seems capable of dissolving. If that sounds familiar, stay with me, because everything happening now is connected to a larger pattern, and before this is over, you will understand exactly why it feels impossible to ignore. The truth is that tonight carries a quality most people will never consciously recognize. Many will move through it without understanding why their emotions suddenly intensify. They will become impatient with people they care about. They will revisit old conflicts in their minds while staring at the ceiling long after midnight. They will feel pressure building beneath the surface without realizing that the sky itself is applying that pressure. But once you understand what is occurring, the experience changes. Once you recognize the pattern, it becomes impossible to pretend it is not there. Something fundamental has shifted, and there is no returning to the previous state of awareness. What makes this night extraordinary is not simply the presence of a first quarter moon. It is where that first quarter moon is positioned. The moon has entered Libra at 0 degrees, while the sun has just entered Cancer at 0 degrees as well. Both luminaries stand at the very beginning of their respective signs, occupying one of the most sensitive points in the zodiac. Astrologers know this place as the Aries point, yet calling it merely a point fails to capture its true significance. It behaves more like a threshold between worlds, a crossing where hidden experiences demand visibility and internal truths refuse to remain private. Energy at this degree has not yet developed habits. It has not formed protective layers. It does not rely on old scripts or familiar responses. It emerges in its purest form, raw, direct, immediate, and impossible to contain. Tonight, both the sun and the moon stand precisely on that threshold. At the same time, they're connected through a 90-degree square, one of the most tension-producing relationships available between celestial bodies. Imagine the psychological effect of that configuration. The Cancer sun is amplifying every desire for emotional security. It speaks of home, belonging, vulnerability, protection, and the need to feel safe enough to lower your defenses. Meanwhile, the Libra moon directs attention toward relationships, balance, cooperation, compromise, and the needs of another person. Both voices are demanding your attention simultaneously. Both insist they are correct. Neither is willing to step aside. This creates an inner conflict that can feel impossible to ignore. One part of you wants closeness. Another part wants reassurance. One part wants harmony. Another part wants honesty. The pressure builds because these needs are no longer content to remain theoretical. They want action. They want resolution. They want a choice. That is why situations that seemed manageable only days ago may suddenly feel impossible to tolerate. That is why emotional discomfort can intensify without warning. The cosmic conditions are removing the luxury of indecision. They are exposing the places where you have remained suspended between opposing realities. Yet, what makes this even more remarkable is that tonight is not an isolated event. It represents the culmination of a process already unfolding for weeks. The emotional wave reaching its peak now began much earlier. If you think carefully, you can probably identify the moment when the first signs appeared. At the beginning of June, the atmosphere felt entirely different. Venus and Jupiter aligned in the heavens, bringing together two of the most beneficial influences in astrology. The emotional landscape felt expansive. Hope became easier to access. Possibilities appeared brighter. Relationships seemed filled with promise. Many people felt inspired to open their hearts, trust the future, and believe that meaningful progress was finally taking shape. There was warmth in the air, both literally and emotionally. There was a sense that life might be moving toward something beautiful. Perhaps you felt it yourself. Perhaps you experienced an unexpected surge of optimism or a renewed belief in someone you care about. Yet beneath that hopeful surface, deeper forces were already preparing their entrance. Only a few days ago, on June 17th, Venus formed an opposition to Pluto. And Pluto rarely operates in subtle ways. Pluto concerns power, transformation, obsession, control, and the hidden motivations people prefer not to examine. When Venus encountered Pluto through opposition, relationships became impossible to view through comforting illusions. The encounter functioned like a spotlight directed into places that had remained deliberately overlooked. Dynamics previously ignored demanded recognition. Emotional attachments revealed their true foundations. Situations that appeared peaceful suddenly exposed underlying tension. Some people discovered that what they called devotion contained traces of fear. Others realized that what they described as stability had quietly become dependency. Long-standing resentment surfaced. Unspoken frustrations gained a voice. Questions emerged that could no longer be dismissed. Once Pluto reveals what has been concealed, awareness changes permanently. The truth may be uncomfortable, but it becomes impossible to unknow. That difficult conversation, that unexpected realization, that emotional reaction that seemed to appear from nowhere during the past few days was not random at all. It was part of a larger sequence that has been building toward this exact moment, and tonight, under this powerful first-quarter moon, and this exact square between the Libra Moon and Cancer Sun at the Aries point, the story reaches a decisive chapter 1 that prepares the ground for everything that comes next. What you experienced before was only the unfolding of the evidence. What arrives tonight is the moment when that evidence can no longer be ignored. The moon, moving through Libra, is not introducing a new story. It is delivering the conclusion to one that has already been developing beneath the surface of your life. Every uncomfortable realization that emerged after Venus faced Pluto, every emotional disturbance you tried to rationalize away, every moment that made you question whether a relationship was truly as healthy as it appeared. All of it now arrives at a crossroads. This is where avoidance stops working. This is where the universe quietly places the responsibility back into your hands. The question is no longer whether something needs attention. The question is what you are willing to do about it. Will you restore balance by speaking truths that make your heart race and your stomach tighten, truths you have rehearsed 1,000 times but never fully voiced? Or will you finally acknowledge that a structure you have been desperately trying to preserve no longer has a stable foundation beneath it? That decision belongs to you, but the energy surrounding this lunation makes one thing abundantly clear. Remaining suspended between both options is no longer sustainable. What makes this even more fascinating is that your awareness may still be catching up to information your body has already processed. Long before the conscious mind creates explanations, the nervous system begins collecting evidence. It notices what drains you. It notices what feels unsafe. It notices the emotional cost of pretending everything is fine. Many people assume emotional awakening begins with a thought. In reality, it often begins with a sensation, a tightening in the chest, an inability to relax around certain people, a growing irritation that seems disproportionate to the situation, a strange fatigue that appears whenever one particular relationship enters your thoughts. If you have experienced any of these symptoms recently, do not dismiss them. They are not random emotional fluctuations. They are signals. They are messages traveling upward from deeper layers of awareness. As the sun enters Cancer at the solstice, a profound recalibration begins. The emotional body becomes increasingly sensitive to anything that threatens security, trust, belonging, and genuine care. Cancer energy has little interest in superficial appearances. It wants to know where you are truly safe. It wants to know where your heart can rest without armor. It wants to know which connections nourish you and which ones quietly consume your energy. Because of that, any relationship that consistently leaves you feeling diminished, overlooked, emotionally exhausted, or disconnected from yourself begins triggering internal alarms. Sometimes those alarms appear as impatience. Sometimes they emerge as withdrawal. Sometimes they arrive as an overwhelming desire to create distance from people you have spent years accommodating. If that urge has surprised you lately, understand what is really happening. It is not cruelty. It is not indifference. It is not a lack of compassion. It is your inner system attempting to establish boundaries before your conscious mind has found language strong enough to support them. There is a profound difference between becoming cold and becoming aware. Many people confuse the two. Tonight helps expose that difference. Perhaps you have noticed yourself replaying conversations repeatedly. Perhaps your mind keeps returning to the same unresolved interaction. Perhaps there is a feeling that something inside your life no longer fits, as though you have outgrown an emotional environment that once felt comfortable. Pay attention to that sensation. It matters. The body often recognizes misalignment long before the intellect is willing to admit it. Under this Libra Moon, those two worlds begin converging. The physical response and the mental understanding start moving toward the same conclusion. And whenever those forces align, movement becomes inevitable. That is often the exact moment people initiate conversations they have postponed for years. It is the moment they stop negotiating with truths they already know. It is the moment change becomes more comfortable than remaining where they are. Yet there is another layer to this story, one that explains why this particular first quarter moon feels significantly more intense than most people expect. Hidden within the astrological structure is a chain connecting three deeply personal forces. The moon is traveling through Libra and therefore answers to Venus. Venus currently resides in Leo and therefore answers to the sun. The sun now occupies Cancer and therefore answers to the moon. The result is a continuous circuit. The moon leads to Venus. Venus leads to the sun. The sun returns directly to the moon. The energy loops back upon itself without interruption. This matters because it eliminates the illusion that your emotional life, your relationships, and your identity exist in separate compartments. Tonight, they function as a single system. A disturbance in one immediately affects the others. If a relationship feels unstable, your sense of security becomes unstable. When security becomes unstable, emotional equilibrium begins to wobble. When emotional equilibrium shifts, pressure returns to the relationship itself. The cycle repeats again and again. This is why logical analysis alone may have failed to resolve what you are experiencing. This is why endless self-reflection may feel incomplete. This is why distraction has provided only temporary relief. The issue keeps returning because the energetic pattern itself keeps returning. The loop remains active. Even more importantly, The Venus sitting at the center of this chain is still carrying the imprint of its recent opposition to Pluto. That means every connection within the circuit is infused with Plutonian depth. We are not talking about a casual romantic question. We are not talking about a passing uncertainty. We are discussing a transformational process involving attachment, control, intimacy, vulnerability, emotional power, and the deeper motivations that shape how you love and how you allow yourself to be loved. That is why the atmosphere feels heavier. That is why your choices feel more significant. Beneath the surface, something fundamental is being reorganized. Old relationship patterns are being examined. Old emotional contracts are being reviewed. Old fears are being exposed. The weight of that transformation is particularly concentrated for several signs, and the first sign standing directly beneath this cosmic spotlight is Aries. If you carry strong Aries energy in your chart, tonight may feel impossible to ignore. The Libra Moon activates the area of life associated with your closest one-on-one relationships, bringing long-standing dynamics into full view. Aries thrives on movement, self-determination, courage, and independence. It is a sign accustomed to forging its own path and trusting its own instincts. Yet over recent weeks, circumstances may have repeatedly drawn your attention back toward partnership, not in a comfortable way, in a demanding way. Relationships have been asking for patience when you wanted speed. They have been asking for compromise when you wanted freedom. They have been asking for emotional presence when your instinct was to move forward and solve problems alone. Beneath all of this, a deeper question has been quietly gathering strength. Tonight, that question becomes impossible to avoid. You are being asked to examine whether the energy you have invested into a partnership is being reciprocated in a meaningful way. Whether the fire you continuously offer is being honored or simply consumed. Whether your strength is creating connection or merely sustaining an imbalance that has existed for far too long. And as this realization begins taking shape, the next layer of the story prepares to reveal itself. Or perhaps the opposite reality is the one demanding your attention now. Perhaps your determination to protect your independence has become so strong, so deeply ingrained, that you have unintentionally created distance between yourself and someone whose feelings for you are genuine. This is the uncomfortable territory Aries finds itself standing in tonight. Deep down, you already know there is a conversation waiting to happen. You have sensed it lingering at the edge of your awareness for weeks. Yet every time it approaches, another part of you rushes forward to avoid it. Action feels easier than vulnerability. Movement feels safer than explanation. Taking control feels more natural than sitting still long enough to examine what is actually happening inside your heart. But the sky is no longer supporting avoidance. The Cancer Sun, newly arrived in its own territory at the solstice, is sending waves of pressure directly into the foundations of your emotional life. It is illuminating questions connected to home, belonging, protection, and the environments that either support your growth or quietly undermine it. What once seemed manageable now feels impossible to ignore. If you have consistently invested more energy into a relationship than you have received in return, the emotional imbalance has reached a critical threshold. The frustration you have been suppressing is no longer willing to remain silent. At the same time, if someone has been extending love toward you while you remained emotionally unavailable, that reality is also demanding acknowledgement. Either way, a new boundary must be established. The old arrangement cannot continue unchanged. Yet the method required tonight is completely different from your instinctive approach. Aries often solves problems by pushing forward. Libra does not. The Libra Moon asks for patience, listening, negotiation, and a willingness to understand another perspective before insisting upon your own. This is where the lesson becomes transformative. Strength is not always demonstrated through force. Sometimes strength appears through restraint. Sometimes it appears through the courage to remain present during difficult conversations rather than escaping into action. Tonight, the path forward becomes surprisingly simple, even if it feels emotionally challenging. You either participate in creating a partnership capable of honoring both your need for freedom and your need for connection, or you recognize that you've been carrying a relationship whose cost has become too great. The universe is not offering a comfortable middle ground. It is asking for clarity. It is asking for truth. It is asking for a decision. As that realization settles into place, another sign finds itself standing beneath an equally powerful spotlight. Cancer. This moment belongs to you in ways that may feel both empowering and overwhelming. Ordinarily, the arrival of the sun into your sign signals renewal. It marks the beginning of a new cycle. It often feels like stepping into a fresh chapter, where your vitality, confidence, and personal direction receive additional support. Yet this year, the story contains another layer. The Libra Moon forms a square to that newly arrived sun, placing pressure directly upon the most sensitive aspects of your identity. Few signs understand emotional responsibility the way Cancer does. You are often the person others turn toward when life becomes difficult. You hold space for people. You absorb emotional currents that others fail to notice. You instinctively anticipate needs before they are spoken. You calm tensions. You offer comfort. You create safety. These qualities are among your greatest gifts. However, every gift carries a shadow when pushed too far. Somewhere along the journey, what began as compassion may have slowly transformed into self-abandonment. Without realizing it, you may have become so focused on protecting others that you stopped protecting yourself. You may have adjusted your needs, reduced your expectations, and softened your truth in order to maintain stability within important relationships. Over time, you convinced yourself that this was maturity. You called it understanding. You called it preserving harmony. Yet beneath the surface, another reality was taking shape. Piece by piece, you were disappearing from your own story. The recent Venus-Pluto opposition exposed dynamics that can no longer remain hidden. It revealed where emotional generosity has been taken for granted. It exposed relationships where your empathy became a resource others relied upon without ever replenishing. Some individuals learned to draw strength from your support while offering little in return. Some became comfortable receiving your care while remaining unwilling to provide the same emotional nourishment when you needed it. Pluto has a way of revealing these uncomfortable truths, and once they become visible, pretending not to see them becomes impossible. Tonight, the message arriving through the Libra Moon is profound. Real emotional security cannot be built upon constant self-sacrifice. It cannot depend upon shrinking yourself to maintain another person's comfort. Genuine safety emerges when you trust your own voice enough to use it. That is why conflict becomes such an important teacher now. Every time you retreat, every time you silence your needs to avoid discomfort, you reinforce a pattern that keeps you disconnected from your authentic self. The cosmos is encouraging something radically different. It is encouraging you to stand fully within your truth, without apology. To express what you need without immediately minimizing it. To communicate what hurts without feeling guilty for having feelings. If a relationship can withstand that honesty, it demonstrates genuine strength. If it grows stronger because of your authenticity, then its foundation was real from the beginning. But if everything falls apart the moment you stop abandoning yourself, then what existed was never true emotional partnership. It was dependence on your willingness to erase your own needs. The universe is making something very clear tonight. The chapter of disappearing for the sake of others is coming to an end, and from there, the spotlight shifts toward Libra itself. Libra, the intensity surrounding this lunation, reaches directly into the center of your identity. More than perhaps any other sign, you are feeling the full weight of the moon's arrival at 0 degrees in your own sign, while simultaneously squaring the sun. This is not subtle energy. This is not a gentle whisper. It is a direct confrontation with the image you have spent years presenting to the world. Throughout your life, relationships have often functioned as mirrors. You learn about yourself through connection. You discover who you are through partnership, cooperation, and shared experiences. You understand the importance of balance perhaps better than anyone. Yet tonight, the universe presents a question that cuts deeper than usual. Who are you when there is no one else to adjust yourself around? Who remains when the need to maintain harmony is removed? Who exists beneath the role of mediator, peacemaker, supporter, and partner? The recent Venus-Pluto opposition has already stripped away comforting illusions. Dynamics that once seemed acceptable now appear impossible to ignore. The compromises you justified, the accommodations you made, the ways you continually adapted yourself to maintain stability. All of these patterns are standing beneath a harsh but necessary light. The realization emerging now is both liberating and unsettling. Not every act of accommodation came from love. Some came from fear. Some emerged from a desire to avoid rejection. Some developed as strategies designed to prevent abandonment. Some were ways of maintaining peace, regardless of the personal cost. The problem is that peace purchased through self-betrayal never remains peaceful for long. Eventually, the soul begins demanding authenticity. Eventually, the hidden resentment surfaces. Eventually, the desire to be seen becomes stronger than the desire to be liked. That is where you stand tonight. The Libra Moon asks you to prioritize truth over comfort, to choose honesty even if it disrupts the atmosphere, to reveal what has remained hidden even if doing so creates temporary instability. Meanwhile, the Cancer Sun is highlighting the connection between your relationships and your larger life direction. It is showing you how certain partnerships may have influenced your ambitions, your visibility, your purpose, and your ability to fully step into your public identity. The message becomes impossible to ignore. You cannot continue bargaining away your value simply to maintain someone else's sense of comfort. The scales must finally be adjusted. The risk may feel enormous, yet the reward is equally profound. When you choose authenticity, one of two things happens. Either a false structure collapses because it was never built on truth, or a genuine connection evolves into something stronger, healthier, and more equal than it has ever been before. And while all of this unfolds in full view, another sign remains quietly positioned at the edge of the story, watching events develop before stepping into its own crucial role. Before you assume this cosmic pressure belongs only to Aries, Cancer, and Libra, there is another cardinal force quietly moving through its own transformation, and its experience may be less dramatic on the surface, but no less significant beneath it. Capricorn. While others may be confronting emotional surges, revelations, and immediate relational confrontations, your process unfolds differently. The energy reaches you through assessment, through observation, through a gradual but undeniable examination of what is actually working and what is not. You are not being pulled into emotional storms. You are standing at a distance, studying the architecture itself. The question facing you is not centered on feelings alone. It is centered on sustainability. It is centered on whether the relationship in front of you genuinely supports the future you are trying to create. For some time now, you may have sensed cracks developing within a structure you once trusted. Perhaps there are recurring patterns that interrupt your focus. Perhaps someone close to you repeatedly creates instability where stability should exist. Perhaps you have been carrying responsibilities that should be shared equally. Capricorn energy understands that every meaningful achievement requires a strong foundation. Without one, even the most ambitious vision eventually collapses under its own weight. Tonight's sky asks you to stop postponing conclusions you have already reached internally. If a partnership continually distracts you from your goals, undermines your growth, or fails to meet you as an equal participant in the life you are building, the message becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Waiting longer will not change the reality. Yet the opposite is equally true. If the foundation is dependable, if the person beside you consistently contributes to your growth and supports your long-term vision, then this is not a moment for withdrawal. It is a moment for deeper investment. It is a moment to strengthen what deserves to endure. The reason this distinction matters so much is because tonight is not an isolated event. The choices emerging beneath this solstice sky are part of a larger sequence that continues unfolding. In just over a week, on the 29th, a full moon rises in Capricorn. That full moon acts like a spotlight, illuminating the consequences of everything initiated now. What feels like a conversation tonight may become a commitment then. What feels like a realization now may become a decision then. What feels uncertain now may reveal its true shape under that Capricorn full moon. The structure begins taking form tonight, but its outline becomes unmistakable when that lunation arrives. This is why awareness matters. This is why honesty matters. The seeds planted beneath the current sky do not remain seeds for long. They move rapidly toward manifestation. And there is another factor, intensifying the entire experience. One that explains why emotions seem unusually powerful, why conversations feel heavier, and why words carry more weight than usual. Earlier, I mentioned there was a specific reason. Many of you are feeling this energy so personally. That reason is Mercury. Mercury, the planet governing communication, thought processes, conversations, perception, and expression, is currently moving through Cancer. This changes everything about the way people interact under this lunation. Conversations are not emerging from detached analysis. They are not being filtered through emotional distance. Instead, they are rising directly from the heart. They are moving through memory, vulnerability, and deeply personal emotional landscapes. That is why discussions that seem simple on the surface can suddenly reveal surprising layers. A conversation intended to be brief becomes a confession. A casual exchange becomes an emotional breakthrough. A small disagreement opens the door to years of unresolved feelings. The intensity does not mean anyone is overreacting. It reflects the environment through which Mercury is traveling. Cancer amplifies emotional awareness. It brings history into the present. It reconnects people with wounds they believed had already healed. It reminds them of needs they have spent years ignoring. As a result, communication becomes profoundly charged with meaning. Yet, hidden within this dynamic is an important caution. Mercury is approaching a retrograde phase in just over a week. That detail matters more than many realize. The conversations happening now are essential, but they are not necessarily final. The boundaries established now are important, but they may require refinement later. The truths revealed now are real, but additional layers may emerge as the retrograde unfolds. Situations connected to the past often return during Mercury retrograde, seeking closure, understanding, or deeper examination. Old stories reappear. Previous decisions are reconsidered. Unfinished emotional business resurfaces demanding attention. Because of that, tonight should not be viewed as the final chapter. It is the beginning of a new one. Think of it as the first step across a threshold, rather than the destination itself. The words spoken now become the opening lines of a conversation your soul may have been preparing for over many years. The process begins tonight, but it continues evolving long after the evening ends. This is where your role becomes different from the majority of people moving through this energy. Most individuals will sense the pressure and immediately search for ways to avoid it. They will distract themselves. They will dismiss their feelings. They will interpret profound discomfort as a temporary mood. They will argue about something insignificant instead of addressing the deeper issue underneath it. Then they will return to familiar routines and convince themselves nothing important happened. The opportunity passes. The window closes. The pattern remains unchanged. Months later, they find themselves standing in exactly the same place, wondering why nothing improved. But something tells me you are not here by accident. Something inside you already recognizes a truth that many people spend years avoiding. You understand that silence does not automatically mean stability. You understand that the absence of visible conflict does not guarantee genuine connection. You understand that relationships can appear calm while quietly deteriorating beneath the surface. Most importantly, you understand that repeatedly sacrificing your own needs in the name of peace eventually creates a different kind of suffering. The moon entering 0 degrees of Libra is not asking for ordinary bravery. It is asking for the courage required to enter unfamiliar territory. The courage required to stop repeating old relational scripts. The courage required to speak honestly where you once remained silent. The courage required to establish boundaries where you once tolerated behavior that diminished your spirit. This is not comfortable work. In fact, energy operating at the very first degree of a sign rarely feels comfortable because it demands new territory. It demands unfamiliar responses. It demands growth. Yet what you are feeling tonight is not punishment. It is not resistance from the universe. It is not evidence that something is wrong. It is evidence that movement has begun. The friction exists because something stagnant is being challenged. The discomfort exists because an outdated pattern is losing its hold. Hidden inside the tension is a gift, the opportunity to consciously create a different future rather than unconsciously repeating the past. As the longest day of the year finally gives way to evening, allow yourself to remain present with what is emerging. The sun has reached its highest point and now begins turning inward through Cancer, drawing attention toward emotional truth, personal security, home, belonging, and the places where your heart genuinely feels protected. Across from it, the Libra Moon stands at the very first degree of its sign, holding the symbolic scales and presenting a question that is both simple and life-changing. Are you ready to choose truth over comfort? Are you ready to stop minimizing yourself in order to maintain an illusion of harmony? Are you ready to stop abandoning your own needs for relationships that require your silence to survive? This is the real choice hidden beneath everything unfolding tonight. It is not ultimately about another person. It never was. It is about your willingness to remain loyal to yourself. The partnerships capable of supporting your authentic voice, your authentic needs, and your authentic presence will adapt, evolve, and strengthen. Those connections possess the resilience necessary to survive honesty. The ones that depend upon your self-abandonment will reveal their limitations. The universe is not removing anything that is truly aligned. It is simply revealing what was already there. One thing is certain. The version of yourself that existed before this realization cannot be fully recovered. Awareness changes everything. The scales have already begun moving. The process has already started. And whether you fully recognize it yet or not, some part of you has already begun walking toward the truth. If this message resonated with you and helped you better understand the energy surrounding this extraordinary moment, thank you for spending this time here. Your presence, attention, and openness mean more than you realize. If you would like to continue exploring these astrological cycles and the deeper meanings hidden within them, consider subscribing and becoming part of this journey. I would also love to hear how these themes are showing up in your own life, so feel free to share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Until we meet again, take care of yourself, trust what your inner wisdom is revealing, and stay open to the transformations that are only beginning to unfold.